All right, about time to get started this morning. Give everybody a couple minutes or a minute or so to sit down. But as you're doing that, you can open to John chapter 11. John 11. This is a very familiar passage, and what's most familiar about it is the miracle that Jesus works in John 11. Because Jesus in John 11, we read about Lazarus has died, his friend Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha and Bethany, and we read of Jesus raising Lazarus. And there's a whole lot to be said about that, and hopefully we'll get to some of those things tonight, maybe start some of that this morning. But this morning, I want to talk about the first part of John 11. We're introduced to what's going on here and where they are and who were the characters, not fictional characters, but the Bible characters that are part of this chapter, key parts of this chapter of John here in the first few verses. But we're introduced to one person in particular, one woman who we can learn a lot from. We can do study, often might have seen people do character studies, take each or not each person, but different individuals in the Bible and see what you can learn from each person. Some things, some people you learn what not to do, and some people you learn what to do. Some people you learn both, what not to do and what to do. David's a good example of that. Certainly we see how great a faith King David had, but then we also see how weak David was and how horribly he sinned, and we also see how he repented and he turned back to God. I say all that to introduce this person we're going to talk about this morning, Mary. Mary, she's a woman here in the first century, a woman who was very close to Jesus, not in a romantic way, but as a friend, as a disciple, even more so, with Jesus. And everything we learn from Mary, and in fact from all the Marys that are mentioned, there's more than one. This is just one in particular. But everything we learn from her in this one particular this morning is good. The examples that she displays are good, things we can learn good things from. So here in John 11, start with me here in verse 1. Let's read verse 1, and then we'll read verse 2. We'll be there at verse 2 for a while. Verse 1, John writes, "Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha." So we have Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And we find out this Lazarus is Mary and Martha's brother. We don't read as much about Lazarus throughout the Bible or New Testament as we do Mary and Martha. But here they're in the town of Bethany. Now you picture Jerusalem. They're in the land of Palestine in Israel. Jerusalem is still there. All these places are still there. Although they've changed a lot since the first century. But Bethany is just southeast of Jerusalem, just over the Mount of Olives. We're familiar with the Mount of Olives. Jesus spent some time there. Some significant things happened there. Just over the Mount of Olives, just about 2 miles from the city of Jerusalem, just barely south and just east of Jerusalem toward the Dead Sea is this little town, or little town compared to Jerusalem anyways, especially back then, called Bethany. And this is where Martha and Lazarus and Mary were. This is also, we're going to read about another time Jesus was here in Bethany and speaking to Mary and Martha, and learn some more things about Mary there. So Lazarus, their brother and Jesus' close friend, was sick. So now verse 2, now John here in verse 2, he tells us which Mary this was. There's more than one Mary. You had Mary, the mother of Jesus. More than one Mary. I'll explain that better. More than one Mary mentioned in the New Testament, mentioned in the gospel accounts. You have Mary, the mother of Jesus, the one who gave the miracle of the virgin birth was performed through when she gave birth to Jesus, so his mother. You have Mary Magdalene. She was called Mary Magdalene because she was from the city, Magdala, or I might be saying that wrong, or Magdala, which was in the northern part of Israel, close to where Jesus was from in Galilee, on the Sea of Galilee, one of those towns there. and Jesus cast demons out of her, and she became his disciple. Well, then you have this Mary here. I might be missing some others, but you have this Mary here, Mary of Bethany, we might call her, because she was from this town called, or at least resided, had a house in this town called Bethany. So here's Mary of Bethany, and John tells us, because it's important that we know who this is, so we can learn the other things we can learn from her besides here in this passage. So John tells us here in verse 2 which Mary this is, the person this is. And he points to a particular act that she did, and we're going to go look at that as well. So here in verse 2, John writes it was about Mary. He mentions Lazarus and Martha here, but he specifically mentions Mary. It says in verse 2, it was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Okay, so we learned that Lazarus is also her brother. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are brothers and sisters. Read verse 3 with me. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, saying, sent to Jesus, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. And you see throughout this chapter even more how close Jesus is to these people. Now certainly Jesus came to earth, the Son of God, because he loved everyone. He loves us now and loved them then. But we remember Jesus, when he came to earth, he came as a man. He grew up as a boy. He grew up into a man. He was fully man and fully God. Well, I say that to mention, it says here, he whom thou lovest is sick. Well, it seems Jesus had a significant care for Lazarus. Certainly Jesus cares for everyone, but while he was here on earth, he certainly developed relationships, physical relationships, or maybe I shouldn't say that, but relationships in his physical body here on earth as a man, just like we do. We become closer to certain individuals than we do to others. Certainly we're usually closer to our family, our brothers and sisters, our parents and grandparents maybe than we are to other people. Certainly we all have friends who we are closer to than others, have maybe a deeper connection with, relationship with, maybe more in common than others. Well, Jesus was no different in that sense in a lot of ways. Certainly he was different because he was the Son of God and he came with a mission to die for everyone. But looking at Jesus as the man here on earth, he had certainly, we see here, not just here, but throughout this chapter, a deep connection, a deep friendship with Lazarus and Mary and Martha, Lazarus' two sisters. So he whom thou lovest is sick. We won't get into that any further at the moment. We'll go back and look at Mary. So this Mary, who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. All right. So let's go to Mark chapter 14. We want to see several things Mary teaches us here. In Mark 14, she teaches us several things, and she teaches us some things in some other places as well. So Mark chapter 14. Mark 14. We're gonna just read this 1 through 9 here, then go back and talk about it. So we can get the context and all what's going on here in Mark 14. So after 2 days was the feast of the Passover and of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by craft and put him to death. We're talking about Jesus. We read that over and over again. The chief priests, the scribes, those Jewish rulers were constantly trying to take Jesus and kill Jesus. Verse 2, but they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people. So they didn't want to upset everyone, or not too badly. They were afraid of the people, always at least to some extent, which protected Jesus, maybe by providence. Different times throughout the gospel accounts and throughout his ministry, until it was time for him to actually die. There was an appointed time for him to do so, and he waited until that time to allow them to take him and crucify him. Now, verse 3, we're introduced to what is concern here this morning. Verse 3, and being in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious, and she brake the box and poured it on his head. So here, this Mary has a alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious. Here, she's in Bethany. This is the same town, same place, or about the same place, at least the same town, as we're reading about there in John chapter 11. And this Mary has a box, an alabaster box. The King James says here, I think most translations say that alabaster box. I know a couple others I looked at said the same thing. Well, this is indicating a very expensive container. And the text tells us about this spikenard, this ointment, how very precious it was. Well, this alabaster, the fact that it's not just a box, it's an alabaster box, this material it's made out of is also very expensive. This is a very precious precious ointment, precious liquid or spice that's contained in an extremely expensive container. Extremely, I don't know how fragile it was, but it was an extremely important container. So this is not a small thing, and this is not rich people we're talking about. This isn't a rich woman. This is a woman who's a disciple of Jesus. Certainly, there were people who followed Jesus who we see in other places. It seems he had some people who were maybe more well off and able to financially afford things. I don't know that we see that about this Mary here, but she has this alabaster box of this very precious ointment, this very precious liquid, spikenard. This spikenard is interesting. This is a plant, or spikenard, however you want to say it. This is a plant, or it comes from a plant that grows in India. And apparently that would have been extremely precious for them. We sometimes have things, they're exotic, and that means they're more precious, they're more fine, they're worth more. Well, that's what this spikenard would have been for them. A very precious perfume, very precious ointment from India. And she breaks it, the box, and poured it on his head. I don't know exactly what this box would have looked like. I don't have a picture of it to look at up here. I don't know if her breaking it would have meant that she opened it, broke it loose, or if she actually broke it in half of whatever it was made of to pour it on his head, maybe to signify how serious she was. But either way, she did this. She broke this seal, however she would have done it, to put this ointment on the Lord's head, on Jesus' head. And we find out here throughout the chapter, or this passage, why she did so. So there is Mary, this alabaster box, this very precious ointment. Now read verse 4 with me. And there were some that had indignation within themselves, and said, why was this waste of ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence, and had been given to the poor. And they murmured against her. And Jesus said, let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will ye may do them good. But me ye have not always. She hath done what she could. She is come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken a memorial for her. We go on throughout the text to find that Judas was especially angry about this for very, very selfish reasons. Now there's several things we learn here from Mary. First, she put something, she had her priorities straight. That's rather what I was trying to say. Think about Mary here and what she did and the way. Now, I don't know if Judas was by himself in this. It says there was some there, had indignation within themselves. Why was this waste of ointment made? it seems to me that maybe Judas wasn't the only one thinking this. Maybe there were others there, the other apostles, maybe have thought the same thing. Why would she do this? Why would she waste this ointment this way, waste this money this way? So Mary had at least in this moment, had a respect and understanding, talk more about that understanding she had about Jesus that the other apostles, or the apostles rather, not the other apostles, she wasn't an apostle, she was a woman, but the apostles did not necessarily have. What did Jesus do throughout his ministry and with his apostles? What was their problem very often? They didn't understand fully who he was. What happened whenever Jesus calmed the sea, the storm of Galilee, and Jesus calmed the sea, and their response afterwards, they were shocked that he could do this. They said, "Who is this that even the winds and the seas obey him?" He calmed the sea, and they were, now this is early on, or earlier in his ministry, whenever they're learning these things, and certainly they did understand, at least by Pentecost, whenever the Holy Spirit came and gave them the words to say and the miraculous gifts to the church could be born. They certainly understood who Jesus was by then. But we see them struggling to see who Jesus is and maybe even have the kind of respect that they need to have for Jesus. And one thing particular that they struggled with was understanding what Jesus was going to do. What did Jesus come to do? He came to die, ultimately to die on the cross, shed his blood, be buried for 3 days, and then rise again. So that they had a hard time understanding that. You notice what did the apostles do after Jesus died? They went and hid in the upper room, and from what we can read about their thinking, they seemed hopeless. Although Jesus made all these promises to them, they didn't know what to do. They felt very hopeless. Well, I say all that to say, here's Mary, and she seems to understand something about Jesus that the apostles may have not really fully grasped like they should. So read verse 9 again with me. "Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of her, for a memorial of her." So here we are today, speaking about Jesus, and well, connected to that, speaking about this Mary and what she did. It seems, or it doesn't just seem, she is doing this for a reason. This isn't just a random, that she's doing this maybe what seems to be a random time. This isn't a random act. In just about a week from this time, Jesus is going to be taken by the Jews, tried before Pilate, and sentenced to death. Now, Mary doesn't know that is about to happen, that it's that imminent, but she's obviously been listening to what Jesus taught, to what Jesus said. She's doing this to anoint his body for burial. She understands. She has an understanding of what Jesus has been teaching about his what's going to happen to him, that it seems the apostles didn't really have a good grasp on. It seems that she's paid attention more to what Jesus has said. Imagine that, a woman paying attention better to what's going on around her, or what's being said.
Or she had a lot more faith than they did, knowing that what Jesus is saying is going to come true.
I'd say, yeah, that as well.
She reminded me of the centurion that came to Jesus and asked him to heal somebody in his family, and he said, "You can speak it, and he'll do it." You know, hey, you told about he got a lot of power, he could speak something, and his men would do it. He thought the Lord, all he had to do was say, "Be healed," and it was taken care of. So
and Jesus marveled about how great a faith he had.
But he says that if you'd have been here, you wouldn't have died.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But she didn't quite understand that he could, what he could do, and that he was the resurrection, which he teaches later on in John 11. But yeah, that is, I believe her thinking about Jesus is parallel there to the centurion and her faith. How does, well, I'm just going to mention that later, but how does faith come? By hearing. Romans 10:17. We have to hear what Jesus has taught. That's the same for us today. Well, these people who were around Jesus, how did they develop faith? They heard what he taught. So she heard what he taught, and it seems, at least in this instance, she had a greater faith based on what she had heard from Jesus than the apostles had and what he said.
People that are around somebody a whole lot get familiar with somebody, and they just naturally don't have as much faith in what somebody will do than other people that don't know as well. I mean, it sounds kind of contradictory, but sometimes familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah, it does. Just like Jesus' family, when he went to his family, or his family came to him and basically told him he was crazy, he needs to come back home to Galilee and stop this preaching business, this ministry business. And he wasn't received in his own hometown. Yeah, that happens as well. But Mary, she seems to know Jesus very well, and she does have this great faith in Jesus. She seems to understand, although she certainly probably doesn't understand fully what's going to happen. Everything's not been revealed yet. She does understand that she only has so long with Jesus. She understands that this ointment, and that would have been something that was very, we live in a different time. We don't live in this time with these ancient people, but I don't have all the details about how their funerals would have gone, but different people would have brought ointments to a body that was being buried, had died and being buried. Jesus is still living here. Maybe there's another lesson there. But they would have brought precious ointments. Maybe not this precious, unless they had a lot of money and just could afford to spend on that sort of thing. But just like us, they had certain things, rituals, and maybe not rituals, but things they would do, customs for the burying of a body. Well, that's Mary here is doing. She's bringing ointment that you might bring to a body, but not just any ointment. She didn't just go get the cheapest thing she could get. She went and got the most expensive thing she could buy.
When Jesus was born, the three wise men came and gave real good gifts, and they were expensive also. Yeah,
gold and frankincense and silver, and they did. Yeah, they did. Just brought it to him, and also showed their faith. They had a faith in Jesus when he was born, and they had an understanding of who he was before they went to see him, of what was happening there. So here Mary has that understanding, and she teaches us that, but she also teaches us something else here in this passage, that she had her priorities straight. She knew what was important. The apostles, especially Judas here, Judas had the opposite problem. And we see a contrast there. I want to look at that even more, actually, in another passage. But we see a contrast there in her and Judas. What, her great faith that we've just been talking about, and then Judas, on the other hand. What kind of faith did he have? She had one that was thriving and alive, and Judas had one that was rotten and rotten to the core, and a faith that did not save him. Ultimately, ended up rotting and causing him, his lack of faith rather, to depart from Jesus, to leave Jesus, although he once was with Jesus. Seems he once definitely had a great faith in Jesus, and here he is already in his mind turning away from Jesus, thinking about material things rather than Jesus, placing those above Jesus. And where did those material things lead him? Mary decided to possibly spend all her money on this ointment to anoint Jesus, the one who could save her soul, that would save her soul. Judas, on the other hand, well, what did he do? Well, he would dip in the money bag and take the money. He was out for himself. He was out to cheat, to steal. He was out to do for himself by whatever means necessary. It's interesting how now some people who are out only to do for themselves and don't consider the Lord, don't consider their soul, end up doing very well financially for themselves. But even someone who does well financially for themselves, who leaves the Lord out of it, who turns from the Lord and never turns to the Lord, look at what they have in the end. the same thing Judas did. They had the same kind of, maybe not the same kind of a death, they certainly had the same kind of eternal destination that Judas did for rejecting Jesus and doing something else. We learned something else about Jesus and what he did for Mary here. She chose what was better here and somewhere else here. But we find out about how Jesus looked at this. There in verse 6, whenever they murmured against her, what did Jesus say? Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me." So she chose the good work. There's two different views of what she did. Judas, and seems some of the other apostles, looked at what she did and thought she wasted money. She wasted goods. She didn't have a good purpose in this. But Jesus, on the other hand, immediately comes to her defense. They're unfairly criticizing her. They're criticizing her based on very worldly thinking, based on very worldly thinking, but based on even selfish and sinful thinking that does not include Jesus and what he's going to do and what he's been teaching. What they're thinking, their response to this, their attitude towards it, is completely separate from what Jesus has taught them, completely separate from following Jesus and having faith, like we've emphasized, in Jesus. He comes to her defense. He comes to her defense. The Lord's going to defend us if we obey him, if we put him first. He doesn't come to our defense physically like he is here. She's actually with him. But when we do what the Lord has said, no matter how it seems to the world, when we choose to, I'll just use this as one example, we choose to come to worship on Sunday instead of going and doing something else or trying to get more work so we can make more money or something like that. Certainly, sometimes we have to work on the first day of the week. That does happen. I would hate to know that the EMTs and people aren't going to come to work on the first day of the week if we need them. But my point is, why are we here this morning? Well, we chose something better than what's in the world. We chose Jesus over the world. Well, would that look kind of strange to many people in the world? Absolutely, it would look strange. When we come back on Sunday night, Wednesday night, whenever we don't act like the world during the week, whenever we take time out of our days to study his word or to teach someone about Jesus or to do a good deed. We took time Thursday afternoon to go and do, I'm just using that as an example because several Christians were there going and do some good things for people who were in need of physical things and in need of the gospel, certainly. Well, the world may see that as a waste of time, as a waste of money, as a waste of resource. But Jesus doesn't. Whenever we do what he said, whenever we put him first, we put the good work, the good things. Here we say, she hath wrought a good work on me. But I want to notice something else about what she did. All these examples I gave, other than coming to worship, these works, are a little separate from what she did. What she did was directly, it was, I don't know if you'd call it, well, I think you could call it that, worship, because what did she do? She offered something to Jesus. She offered this precious ointment to Jesus. What do we do when we come to worship? Well, we offer something to Jesus. It's not a waste of time to offer Jesus what's going to please him, to offer Jesus our very best. There's all kinds of lessons we can learn from this. She offered him her very best. What should we offer Jesus when we come to worship? Well, we have to offer him our very best. We can do all the things that follow the patterns that we find in the New Testament concerning worship on the first day of the week. We can sing, we can pray together, we can give as we've been prospered, we can all learn from God's word together, and the center of that, remember the Lord's death, burial, resurrection, or especially his death and the bloodshed and the Lord's Supper. But are we giving him our best? It has to be our very best. If we do all those things with the wrong attitude, then we're not giving him our best. She certainly had the right attitude. She took a risk on doing this, on going out right in front of these men in doing this and suffered criticism, but Jesus came right there to her defense. No matter what kind of criticism we face, Jesus will be there at our defense if we're on his side, if we're following him. Now, and that I mentioned that about Judas and his Judas and her, the contrast of her and Judas. I want to look at this here, and well, you can go there with me to Ecclesiastes 7:1. That's just a short verse, but I want to see this, and then we'll see this contrast of her and Judas. Yeah, we'll go to Ecclesiastes 7:1 first. Well, that makes sense. We just talked about these good works, so that's what we'll talk about next. She teaches us that about good works. She did a good work on Jesus, and what did he say there in the last verse there, in verse 9, that when Jesus, what he said, what she's done is going to be spoken of when people preach the gospel, teaching about Jesus and what he did. They're going to talk about you and what you did. Well, Ecclesiastes 7:1, if you read there with me, says, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of one's death than the day of one's birth. Well, I don't know that that's an exact parallel passage. I don't know that that Solomon was looking forward to what Mary would do here when he wrote this passage, but it's certainly talking about a very similar thing. What did Mary achieve in doing this act upon Jesus, on doing this good work, choosing this good work over other things? Well, she received a good name. And it's also interesting, you can't help but notice, Solomon there wrote, a good name is better than precious ointment. Well, the apostles didn't think so, did they? Or at least they didn't quite understand, fully grasp that concept here at the moment. Imagine they probably did later on. Think about looking back at this later on after he died. Jesus died and then resurrected. I wonder if they ever did. I would say they probably definitely did, although we don't read about it. But a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of one's death than the day of one's birth. Mary knew that. I wonder if she read that, this proverb, not called a proverb, but this writing from Solomon and Ecclesiastes. She would have had this writing certainly available. This is part of the Old Testament. And she gave Jesus that precious ointment, although Solomon's using it as an illustration, just something very precious. She gave him the very best, and she received a good name because of it. You think about, there's been songs written about people's last names, and maybe your last name has bad things attached to it. Or maybe it has good things attached to it. Maybe it has both. But you think about somebody's last. What's that?
Oh, Savage.
Oh, Savage. Well, that's Savage. Yeah, I guess it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Some last names are a little more descriptive than others.
It's true. It's true. Maybe not what the name literally means, but the kind of people that that came before you. I didn't know any of the Savages to fit the description of the name. So I think it does carry something good, not bad. The opposite, that'd be an oxymoron. Savage. The Savages aren't savages. So, anyways, that's pretty good.
I think you ought to close that.
Just close that. So, anyway, so the point is, our last names are important to us very often. If you do have bad things attached to your name, you probably want to make it better. You want to pass down to your children something, or want to pass down to your children something better, so that they you can redeem your name maybe, or if your name's always been good, your last name's always brought good things, and that's been your not ancestry, but your heritage. Well, you want to pass those good things on to your children,
Like
or
they
take
used to give a handshake, and that carried in that family's name. Those people were honorable. They were honest. Just with a handshake, they would seal them.
Oh yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, that's a
Makes
good
their
name.
name good.
Yeah. Well, here's Solomon talking about that. A good name better than precious ointment. And Mary, we don't know what her children or grandchildren did, but she certainly passed on a good idea, a good thought. We can learn good things from her. Now let's look at her. So look at her name and what she did. Now what about Judas? Now go another writing of Solomon, Proverbs 10 and verse 7. Proverbs 10 and verse 7. Solomon writes here in Proverbs 10 and verse 7, the memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. Well, that sounds just like Judas and Mary. What do we remember Judas for? The one that betrayed Jesus. In fact, read Acts 1. Whenever Matthias replaces Judas, they had needed 12 apostles. So they had to replace him with another apostle, and they replaced him with Matthias, eventually there in Acts 1. But what did they say about Judas when they spoke about Judas? How did they describe him? The one who betrayed Jesus. Now, that's how he was known. That's how he's known now. Look at the name he made for himself. The example that he left. The one that he was once with Jesus, he was once faithful to Jesus, at least for a time. Jesus chose him as one of the apostles. That's something interesting. You read about the limited commission. That's when Jesus sent his apostles out and gave them the power before he died. And then they went out throughout the land of Israel, and they performed some miracles and cast out demons and different things by the power Jesus gave them. But you read about that. Judas was part of that. He was one of those apostles doing that. He was one of those apostles helping teach. He probably baptized people. They were baptizing in John's baptism still during that time. John 4, we see there that they were baptizing many people, although Jesus didn't baptize anyone, but his apostles did. Well, Judas was one of those apostles, teaching people the truth about Jesus, yet he fell away. And he decided to turn on Jesus and on his brethren. And so doing, look what happened to his name. The memory of the just, remembering Mary is blessed. We're blessed from it, from what she did. We're blessed to learn about the kind of character she had, the kind of attitude she had. And what is Judas' name? Well, it's exactly what the writer here, Solomon, wrote in Proverbs, shall rot. Well, it's definitely rotting. And we can learn the opposite from Judas that we learned from Mary, that we don't want to name that rots. Now, to finish up, let's look at one more thing about Mary. We've already talked about this a little bit, but she teaches us that she teaches us first, there's nothing we can do that's too great for Jesus. I don't really talk about that as much, but she didn't think this ointment was too expensive to put on Jesus, although the apostles did. She thought it was perfectly acceptable to spend that much money, to put that much effort into letting Jesus know how much she cares about him and showing Jesus the faith and the concern she has for him. But last, let's look at Mark. No, not Mark. I have the wrong passage here. Luke, rather. Luke 10, verse 38. Luke 10 and verse 38. Luke 10. Verse 38. Another familiar passage. We read about Mary and Martha, same place here. They came. So in verse 38, now it came to pass as they went, they entered into a certain village, that was Bethany, where they lived, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his words. So here's Mary, the same Mary it's under consideration here. But Martha was cumbered about with much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou care? My sister hath left me to serve alone. Bid her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things. But one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Now let's look at a few things here in this last few minutes we have. Here they are, the same place, the village of Bethany. That's that village just west of Jerusalem where Mary and Martha and Lazarus resided.